All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to start our afternoon program. So if you don't mind taking your seats, and we'll get off to a great start. So thank you again for your interest in showing up at Industry Day. I hope you really enjoyed the interesting suite of topics and speakers this morning. And now we're going to actually turn to our next GNF. This is a panel devoted to basically building, sustaining the global space workforce. In my opinion, of all the panels that we've had, of course, many of them are very interesting, but I think this is one of the most interesting because despite all the plans, all of the things that we want to do, we can't do it unless we have the right people. And so at the end of the day, this is really about the future of our global space community, of how we recruit, we retain, we develop the best and brightest across the entire spectrum, from scientists, engineers, business people, lawyers, policy folks, even social scientists, those involved with arts, etc. So this is a really important topic. And I think it's very fitting that we have as a moderator for this panel, Clementine de Koopman, who is the Executive Director of the Space Generation Advisory Council. As many of you know, this is a young professional organization at the global grassroots level that has been really dedicated to basically fostering the development of workforce and essentially the career development, professional development of young professionals that in the future, they become the leaders in the global space community. So Clementine, as Executive Director of the SGAC, she's going to call her up now to the moderator, and then she is going to actually introduce her individual panelists that span business, government in the civil, as well as on the military side. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Clementine.
Thank you very much, Robbie. So as Robbie said, my name is Clementine de Koopman. I am the Executive Director for the Space Generation Advisory Council, or SGAC. And it is my great honor to be a moderator for this plenary session, Building and Sustaining the Global Space Workforce for the Future. So given this year's IAC theme, Space, the Power of the Past, the Promise of the Future, a discussion on the future of the global space workforce is critically important and relevant. The panel will explore one of the key challenges facing the global space community, the attraction and retention of young professionals across a spectrum of career fields to the space sector. And without further ado, I would like to welcome our distinguished panelists. We have Minister Andrews from the Ministry for Industry, Science and Technology of the Australian Government. Mr. Juan de Dalmo, President of the International Space University. Major General Pamela Lincoln, Mobilization Assistant to the Chief of Staff of the U.S. Air Force. And Mr. Bob Smith, Chief Executive Officer of Blue Origin. Thank you very much. So thank you very much for being here with us today. We're so excited to be able to hear your thoughts and perspective on how we can together build the global space workforce for the future. And before we start this plenary, I'm excited to let you know that you all can submit questions as well in the audience to our distinguished panelists. And for that, we will use an application which is called Slido that you can connect on the IF app. And you will be able to see instructions and submit your questions. So please don't hesitate to do that. So I would like to first address the questions to all our panelists. As a young professional, where did you see yourself going, and how did you end up where you are today? And I would like to start with you, Minister Andrews, please.
Thank you very much. Look, I started my career as a mechanical engineer. And at the time that I went to university, there was myself and one other girl in the mechanical engineering class. Did I see myself a number of years later as the Minister for Industry, Science and Technology. No, I didn't. In fact, when I was going through university, I was actually particularly interested in motor racing and thought I may well have been working on some of the Formula One cars would have been my dream. I guess now if I had the opportunity to do it all again, the industry of choice for me would certainly be the space sector.
Wow, that's awesome. So, Mr. De Dalmo?
Clementine, thank you. Robbie, thank you as well for the opportunity. It looks like studying mechanical engineering doesn't harm your career. And I was also studying the same thing. I had the privilege of growing up in a multicultural family with a mother from Germany, a father from Spain, who had both lived through wars and post-wars. So I grew up with learning about what happened in Germany, what happened in Spain during the Civil War. And I felt it's very enriching to be in two worlds at the same time. So I started discovering the importance of cross-cultural education and how you as an individual can help making bridges and giving value that maybe other people do not give. So later on I discovered the usefulness of studying more than one thing. So after mechanical engineering I was able to come to the United States and learn a bit about business administration. And later on I discovered the usefulness of being cross organizations. So I was lucky to work for the European Space Agency and then for some periods also for the French Space Agency. They're both Europeans, but they have very different corporate cultures. And someone who has worked for both can then be helpful to both of them by building bridges. But then ultimately, I would say, where I really learned about multicultural activities and multidisciplinary activities is when I discovered something called the International Space University. And I was privileged to benefit from a joint scholarship from both ISA and CNES to attend the ISU summer school.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just on a panel right before, and they were saying that you should never stop learning as an advice to young professionals here, because yes, you can come from wanting to work on Formula One to space, so that's very interesting. General Lincoln, please.
Thank you. Okay. So to answer your question, did I see myself where I am today? No, absolutely not. But what helped get me here were two things. Wonderful mentors, people who vectored me to go after certain positions or certain education, and my family, especially my spouse. So without those two influencing factors, I don't think I would be where I am today. And I have to say, space is extremely exciting. There are many, many opportunities. When I first started, I thought I was going to go into computer science, and that didn't happen, but there's definitely plenty of application of computer science in space. Several other areas as well.
Thank you. And Bob?
Yeah, thank you, and thank you, Robbie, for setting this up. I always like this question about how did you select your career? And I literally cannot remember selecting my career. I don't remember. There was never a time in my life that I didn't say, I want to be an aerospace engineer. I just cannot remember that. I think the Apollo mission had a profound effect on me and a number of others. My father was an Air Force pilot. I became a pilot as soon as I could afford it and actually go fly. So I've always had this need to be in this industry. I've always wanted to go do this more than anything else. And so I went and got as much education as they'd let me have and finally kicked me out after I went through several degrees and said, you can't get any more. And so then I started working and tried to learn as much as I could about the industry, just broadly. Just trying to understand. I started off at the Aerospace Corporation, then worked on the shuttle program, then at Honeywell Aerospace and learned a broad a breadth of the industry there as well. And by doing that, I picked up some skills along the way, which helped actually come into play for what I'm doing at Blue Origin today, which is, by the way, we're hiring. So everybody in the room, please send your resume, which is a fun place to work because we're growing really quickly.
Thank you very much. So as you can see, some people, they know from the start, from when they are kids, that they want to work in space. Some people, they don't, but it doesn't prevent them from being successful in the industry. As long as you have that curiosity and that passion about space, you can always become very successful. So you talk about recruitment. This is a very important point in the building the global space workforce for the future. So question to you, Bob, would be, what is your strategy for recruiting young talent, and how do you make sure that the positions are actually attractive to them?
Yeah, I think this is also one that we look for a lot at Blue, which is the thing we screen on for most anything else. Why do you want to come to Blue Origin? Do you have a passion for the mission that we're doing? And that is critical to what we talk about, because going to space is hard. If you want to do something easy, go sell real estate or something. Don't go into space. I mean, it is just a hard place to work. It's very challenging. And you've got to have that level of commitment and drive and passion for this industry to go do that. Beyond that, then it becomes like many other industries, that we actually go deeply into what your capabilities are, and what your behavioral attributes are as well. So we talk about whether you can actually work well in a team. Do you have humility? Do you listen well? Do you actually get things done? Is also part of what we actually think about. So we screen on those factors as well. But first and foremost is, do you have the passion for it?
Great. And there's actually an audience question that I found very relevant here, is that the jobs that excite are not always at entry level. And so how do you keep new hires engaged so we do not lose better opportunities?
You want me to go again? Yeah. So I think one of the things that we try and do at Blue is actually makes people accountable for work and actually own something. And so that sense of this is mine to actually go get done is important, because then you can give somebody a larger task and then expand from there. And by doing that, they not only get a sense of ownership and responsibility for the task that they're doing, but also one of the great things about being in a technology field is that you actually give birth to something. It's something creative. When you actually are done with it, you go, I did that, or I made that part, or I contributed in that way. And that actually gives a certain amount of stickiness to a workforce. They go, that's mine, and that's what I want to be a part of.
Right, and we'll talk about this also later, of what young professionals like me, like all those young professionals in the room are really expects, and how they want to make an impact on their company when they start their career. A question to Minister Andrews. The Australian Space Agency is pretty young. How is the response and the feedback from young professionals since the creation of the agency? And do you experience any difficulties in recruiting young talent?
Well, thanks for that question. Yes, the Australian Space Agency is very young. It's about 14 months old now. And I think it's fair to say that the last 14 months have seen a significant transformation of the space industry in Australia. So prior to the establishment of the agency, we probably had about 10,000 people employed in the sector, and it was worth about $4 billion. What the Space Agency has done is opened the door for opportunities internationally, but it's also become a focal point for people who are interested in the space sector or are developing an interest. Now, I'd say if I take up a couple of the points that Bob actually made, the role of government is to do whatever it can to make sure that Bob has the biggest possible talent field to choose from. And I think one of the issues that we're now facing is that globally, if I talk exclusively at this point about the space sector, it's a significant industry, it is a growing industry, and it means that we have to make sure that we have the skills or the talent pipeline to support that. Now, for a range of reasons that I'm sure we'll discuss today, there aren't sufficient students studying science and maths at school, which means that the ability to develop the talent pool that people such as Bob need is particularly limited. So we do need to look at what the opportunities are going to be to develop the skill set that we need. Now, where planning to use the Australian Space Agency to inspire young Australians and also other people around the world to encourage them to look to the jobs of the future, that space may well provide them with an opportunity. But I think we've focused on you need to study science and maths at school because the jobs of the future are going to require that skill set, to saying, well, here are what the jobs of the future are going to be. And if you want to develop that pathway, then you do need to have a strong science and maths background for it. So we're now focusing on what the end point is going to be, using space as an inspiration to bring the pull through that we need of talent.
Thank you. And General Lincoln, do you have a perspective on recruitment of young talent in the military? Do you experience the same challenges yourself?
Yes, and I'd like people to start thinking more, not so much competition, there is competition, but sharing resources. For example, Carnegie Mellon University encourages its faculty to go out into industry, spend a couple of years in industry, and then come back. In the Air Force, we have a program called Education with Industry, and we send military members to industry and then they come back. We have people in industry that can get a direct commission into the military and they might go back to industry. So we really have to start thinking about how can we share resources. We already know there's a competition, so how can we use all the wonderful STEM folks out there the most efficiently and effectively?
Thank you. And so the global business community today is being challenged by millennials who really want to change the world. So a question to Juan would be, how does IASU prepare the space workforce of the future? Through which initiative and programs?
It's good you mentioned the millennials and that you asked a question to someone who was born in the last millennium. But something I feel I had in common in my youth, and I still have in common with the millennials today, is that I've always wanted to change the world. Remember, I grew up in a family that had lived through 2 different wars, so one of my dreams as a child was to make a difference, somehow, to keep this place a peaceful one. And by the way, I thank those who help us keep the peace. Thank you to all the military people around the world who do that. But my path was one where I would try to have a career in the civilian world. And I discovered, when I had the honor of meeting the founders of the International Space University, there's one sentence that still resonates with me. And you will allow me to read it from the credo of the university, where it says, "This is a place where students and faculty from all backgrounds are welcomed, where diversity of culture, philosophy, lifestyle, training, and opinion are honored and nurtured." Imagine this would be true everywhere in the world. It would be a better world. So those ideas have walked with me for many, many years. And your question, Clementine, is about what does the ISU do? Well, we are very lucky that the people we managed to attract to come to our courses, they already bring a lot of enthusiasm about space. And they might be able to help with the STEM education because they can bring that enthusiasm not only back to their employers, but maybe back to their home school, their alma maters, and they can transmit these principles. And what we also see is that those who belong to a network of like-minded professionals, the network becomes naturally very, very strong. It's informal, but it's very strong.
Thank you. There's actually a question from the audience here is, what do you say to those who say that diversity will just happen and organizations do not really need to actively foster in their recruitment efforts because you are in contact with a lot of potential employers? So what would you respond to those who say that diversity will just happen?
I'm not sure I understood the question. Could you rephrase it?
Yes, what do you say to the people who say that diversity will just happen and that organizations should not look actively for diversity when they recruit young talent, as you're in contact with a lot of potential recruiters?
About diversity, what should organizations do to improve?
Recruit?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, maybe one technique is if people tell you to make an effort towards diversity. In our case, we receive funds from many organizations, and some of them, for example, the European Space Agency, when they decide to give a scholarship money for us to distribute among the best candidates from ESA member states, they tell us, you have an effort to make for gender diversity, obviously also for geographic diversity, and you have to reach these targets. So if we don't do that, we are in trouble.
Any of you would like to respond to Juan on his comment?
Yeah, I think this is a great topic. I think this is one that you have to, the idea that it's just going to happen is just not fair. One, fundamentally, people like to hire themselves. I mean, that's just a human trait. And that's actually a trap because the best way that you get access to all the talent is be as diverse and inclusive in all the ways you possibly can. Otherwise, you're limiting yourself from a great diversity of capability. You're actually, if you're not capable of attracting talent from one segment, no matter what that segment is, from experience or ethnicity or race or sex, obviously, you can not get those ideas into your company. And if you're a knowledge worker, and we're all in technology fields, the only way that you actually invent something new and make something new is actually have those diverse ideas and attract the best people in the world into your company. So you have to go after that. You have to make it a diverse and inclusive environment, or you're just shutting off a wide swath of the population.
Right. So we talked about the recruitment phase, but what happened after the recruitment phase? There is a study from the World Economic Forum that found that over 40% of young people think that sense of purpose and impact on society is one of the most important criteria when considering a career opportunity. And 50% of young people agree to take a pay cut to find a job that aligns with their values. And so I'd like to ask a question to General Lincoln and Minister Andrews. Do you have any strategy to attract, retain, and inspire the current young professionals and develop future workforce for your organization or national space ecosystem? Would you like to start?
Yes, I'm happy to start with that. And look, and I'll commence my answer by saying that we know that there already is a problem with the skills that are needed for the future, not just in Australia, but globally. And we have to do something about developing the pipeline to enable businesses to have the talent pool that they need to select. One of our focuses in Australia is going to be how we encourage more women to enter the various STEM disciplines. The reason that we're interested in attracting more women is because we know that they are underrepresented. So a lot of work needs to be done to make sure that we encourage young women, in particular, to study science and maths and then to enter the STEM field. One of the more significant things that we have done is appoint a Women in STEM ambassador. It's Professor Lisa Harvey-Smith, and she has been tasked with talking to our young people about what the opportunities are for them. Now, it's exactly right that the values of our young people is what's going to drive them in their employment ambitions. So what we need to do is, even I'll use the space example, look at the opportunities to develop a workforce that understands the impact of science on everyday lives and the impact of space on everyday lives, because that's what's going to attract people. So it has to be more than, you know, the high level, here are the opportunities for you to study physics or chemistry. It has to be how we actually use the sciences in everyday lives and how that makes that better, whether it's for the health of our nations, whether it's for the ageing population. It's translating science so that it becomes a normal part of everyday language and people understand how science is part of their everyday lives.
General Lincoln?
So in order to recruit somebody to work in the Department of Defense, either in uniform or outside of uniform, we hope to connect with them in their sense of supporting something bigger than themselves. Each of the services has core values. For example, in the Air Force, we have 3 core values: integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all we do. And everything that we do, we incorporate our core values into. So if I'm going to recruit somebody, I'm going to recruit them, hopefully, that they also inculcate that core value. Now, to retain them, they have to see a future for themselves. They have to see that there's something they can aspire to. And in order to do that, we have a program both in uniform and outside of uniform where you can get credentialed, you can get further education. We'll send you to get your master's or your PhD. And we have specific positions for you that you can go across if you like to travel or if you like to stay in one place. We have positions all across the United States where you can continue your career. And like I mentioned before, maybe I release you to go work with industry and then you come back and you bring back those experiences. So those are just a couple of our retention programs.
Great, thank you. And Minister Andrews, now that Australia has a space agency, how do you capitalize on that and keep the next generation moving into space careers? How is Australia helping to foster space workforce and STEM workforce?
So there are 2 parts to the space story in Australia. The first part is the impact that it will have with growing our economy as an emerging future industry for us. The second part is the inspirational part of the space agency. We're working to make sure that space is seen as an opportunity for a career path for young people. Look, what we've found, quite frankly, is that that young kids, perhaps all of us, like 2 things in particular: space and dinosaurs. So we're going to very much focus on the opportunities that are going to come our way through the space sector to inspire our young people to look towards that. Now, since we've opened the space agency about 14 months ago, there has been an enormous impact in the way that young people see space as an opportunity for them. We've just celebrated, along with the United States, the 50th anniversary of Neil Armstrong taking his first steps on the moon. There was a lot of excitement about that in Australia, and of course Australia had a key part in beaming that vision to the world. But it's part of the inspirational story of a space. And speaking with the head of NASA yesterday, it really brought home that, in fact, there are so many people, and he said words similar to this, there are so many people who have not experienced the Neil Armstrong first steps on the moon. They weren't alive at that point in time. And what we need to do is work towards what's the next big inspirational story for people.
Right, so we see these parallel efforts that is very crucial, is to inspire the young generation to get involved in space through STEM education, and then once they are in the company or the organization, keep that inspiration going and tell them that they can actually have an impact within their company, they can shape their company strategy. A question to Bob: can young professionals at Blue Origin play a role in shaping the corporate direction of the company? And how do you ensure that they have this impact that they so much wish for and have the right tools to have that impact?
Yeah, there's a couple ways. First and foremost, one thing that we actually talk about within Blue Origin is our Blue Leadership Principles. So we have 12 leadership principles that we talk about that everybody should be working on and thinking about. One of them is fundamentally practicing humility. And what we mean by that is that you listen, and you listen well. And I think one of the things that is a challenge for anybody that's progressing in their career is they're going to develop a certain way of doing things. They're going to develop some capabilities. And so it's going to trick you into thinking that you're right a lot because you've been successful in getting some things done. But that means you stop listening, and you stop listening with great intent. And so one of the things we challenge all of our leaders at Blue to the lowest level is listen. Listen thoughtfully and actually be open to ideas. And so everyone in the company can write a memo, present their ideas, challenge things. We actually encourage that idea. We have another leadership principle that's called disagree and commit, meaning that I'm going to actually challenge what you're saying. I'm going to do it politely, I'm going to do it respectfully, but we're going to get the data on the table and we're going to talk about it and we're going to work through it. At some point you got to make a decision, and so therefore you may disagree or someone may disagree. I disagree a lot and commit, and others people will have to disagree and commit when I make a decision as well. So that's a place that actually we focus a lot on, because if you're going to fly humans in space, which is what Blue Origin is committed to do, to actually get millions of people living and working in space, you have to have this culture of being able to listen to even the slightest signal that you may be on the wrong path. And that's how people throughout the company can help.
Right. And there's a question from the audience that says, what was the most important piece of advice you were given? I'd like to change a bit that question and ask you, what was the best piece of advice you received early on in your career on how you can make an impact on the space industry and in your companies?
I think we hit it earlier, but I think it's exactly true. I always tell people at any part of their career is to think of really just fundamentally two things. You're a knowledge worker. You're not a craftsman. You're not doing something with your hands. So therefore, every year, if you're not getting better at what you do in all aspects, whether it's leading a team, managing a project, understanding your technology, understanding your business, understanding the markets that you're in, if you're not developing skills in all of those facets, personally, professionally, you're not progressing. So you should learn continuously throughout your career and challenge yourself to learn something every day. And then secondly, I say, is just make getting results your calling card. If somebody can say to you, I need to get this done, and can you get that done for me? And you just go away and get it done, it's a huge multiplier for you. You then become known for people that by, hey, give that to that individual and they'll get it done. And then you get more responsibility and people just trust you to get things done. So I think those are two things that I heard early on that have really stuck with me, and I pass on them whenever I can.
Thank you. I think these are great piece of advice that young professionals in this room can also take with them. Any other panelists who would like to share an advice they were given to have an impact in their career? General Lincoln?
I have to say, I can't take credit for this, but once upon a time I was told you can't swim unless you get in the water. So you actually have to put yourself out there. You have to, if you get turned down from the first job, you have to continue submitting your resumes. And once you get hired, you have to try your best, and you have to be able to be willing to take chances.
Right. Thank you. So we've heard from all of you on the expectation as potential employers with regard to young talent. And so I'd like to ask and hear from Juan on how do you take into account the expectations from employers in the industry with regards to profiles and skills of young talent when you build your program at ISU?
Thank you, Clémentine. In fact, employers are part of the university. And if there's anyone in the room who is hiring or who is looking for new colleagues, I would invite you to come and meet with the current students. It's very easy. Just come to Strasbourg, where the central campus is, or go to Adelaide, where the next Southern Hemisphere school will take place, or go to Seattle, or go to Florida, and meet with the students. If you choose Strasbourg, you will meet a class of students of the Masters of Space Studies. And if you try to do your statistics, you will realize that the female to male ratio is 60 to 40. We're very proud of that. It's the first year where we have more women than men. And they were very proud the other day when they were watching live the launch of, what's her name? Jessica Mayer? Yes? Hi, Jessica. They were very proud, and we're trying to send her pictures and messages. Hopefully she will tweet back. So how do employers get their expectations fulfilled? I think the model is relatively simple. We have those employers coming and teaching. We have those employers sending a colleague so that they have an insider in the community afterwards. We invite the employers to propose topics for team projects that our students, our participants will then work on. So it's an open circuit where any employer can be part of the teaching. And that makes it just natural that we fulfill the expectations.
Thank you. Any recommendations from any other panelists to educators in the room on how they can best fill that gap between your expectations and university's program when they build their university program?
Look, I might just add to that. We're doing a lot of work in Australia to make sure that our graduates are job ready so that they are leaving university with the skills to start their career. Now, having said that, patience is something that we are trying to convey as a positive for the students and also for the employers. So from the students' point of view, yes, they should be aspiring to being head of the Australian Space Agency or head of NASA. The reality is that it's going to take years of experience to get to that point because it's a good thing to have a qualification, but it's essential to have some work experience to build your progression. Similarly, for employers, we're working with them so that they understand that, yes, we will be looking to produce job-ready graduates, but when they're recruiting, if they are recruiting a new graduate, it's unrealistic to expect that they will come into the workforce with, let's say, 5 years of experience. So everyone needs to manage and adapt their expectations. But it is very important for employers to be part of our education system. So we do encourage them to engage with schools, with universities, with vocational education providers, so that they can be part of developing what the curriculum should be, but also providing the input that those educational institutions need so that they can ensure that the graduates that are being produced are job ready.
Thank you. And a question from the audience is interesting, how to attract talents from non-space sector to work on space-related application and technology to boost this inter-sector collaboration, because there are students who have been through Space University, ISU, they have studied STEM, but there are also potentially young talent that are not from the space sector and would be interested in entering the industry.
So I think this is a great opportunity for the aerospace industry. I think one thing that the aerospace industry in the 60s, for example, they led a lot of the innovation that came into a lot of other industries. So for example, superconductors and just processing generally didn't exist for a large part of the Apollo program, and they had to go develop some of those technologies, material scientists, other things, learning how to make EEE parts actually radiation hardened. A number of these other technologies just didn't exist elsewhere, so the aerospace industry had to go invent them. I think what we're finding now is that there's a lot of industries that are doing remarkable things and are actually surpassing aerospace in a lot of different areas. So if you think about what aerospace is good at, we're very good at making things go high and fast. We have some exquisite capabilities within aerodynamics. But if you think about other industries, about what they do to actually make exquisite products, like the automotive industry that is producing, literally millions of units with very, very high quality. I wish we in the aerospace industry had the same level of quality that they do first off the line. We inspect in quality, we make sure that it absolutely works, but it's not as good as what we actually design into our system. So you can learn a lot from the automotive. I think you get a lot from other industries that are much more digitally enabled than the aerospace industry is broadly, and they integrate their tools better than we do. And so there's a lot of places outside of that, whether you're talking about AI, computer learning, how do you actually integrate enterprise systems, automotive, that are all great technologies that can come into the aerospace industry and actually give us better capability than they actually hire into from other people in the aerospace industry.
Thank you. Juan?
Yes, perhaps to complement the answer about how to bring non-space towards space and have those other sectors benefiting from space. If we look at it from the educational side of things, I would say we could design programs, educational programs, that are making space understandable to someone who comes from a different sector or from a different specialty. So in other words, if you are in finance and you are hired by a new space company as the CFO, why don't you go and take a course where you will learn the basics of orbits, which ones are there, why do we need different types of orbits for our satellites? If you are someone who comes from the diplomacy world, for example, and you need to work for your government in a place where there's a lot of space talk, why don't you take a course where you learn about space policy in other parts of the world, but also about orbits, about space regulations and space law, and how they're used differently in other countries than your own, so that you understand better what your partners are saying. So what we're trying to do is designing multidisciplinary space courses where all these non-space people can really get the basics of the other disciplines, the other countries, the other cultures, and just feel more self-confident when they have to talk and work with these people from other backgrounds.
Thank you. So we talked about recruitment, we talked about inspiring the young generation to get involved in space, also look outside the space sector to build the space workforce of tomorrow. There's this question from the audience before we move on to the next phase after the recruitment and the retention. This question is about what is the greatest barrier to retention and advancement of young professionals in aerospace today, and how should we work to mitigate it?
Maybe I can start. In the old days, some employers would think, if I send you to this training, it's costing me money, you will not be working for us, and in addition, you might be looking for a different job while you're studying there. I think that's very old school. Today, if someone from our organization comes to the management and says, I want to take that course, that person will explain why, and what's the benefit for the person, but also for the employer. So I would say the best way of retaining colleagues is by letting them go and learn, and then come back. And if they decide not to come back, at least they will have good memories from the former employer, and they will be your ally from wherever they are.
I would say there is no one greatest barrier. There are a multitude of barriers. For example, someone decides to start a family, and you have two working folks, and then children come along. Eventually, what we experience in the military is that one of those folks is going to leave. That's a barrier. How do I encourage that person that they are still valuable and they can still participate? And maybe I let them participate in a part-time basis. And I have to allow those opportunities. Another barrier is not feeling fulfillment. Another barrier could be a bad supervisor. How do I, like you had talked about, how do I maintain oversight of the culture so I can identify those toxic leaders and remove them? And maybe they're not bad people, they're just not good supervisors. So, there are a multitude of barriers. I think we just have to make sure that we are prepared to address each one.
I guess I would just say that the model that we look to at Blue Origin is very similar to what was done in the early phases of Apollo. If you look at our team and just the general demographics, we have a smaller group of experienced professionals with a large group that's actually early career. And that is really empowering because they get their hands onto some really meaty pieces of work and are excited about it. They have that level of ownership, but they also get that guidance and mentorship that's needed to actually not trip over the lessons learned that we've developed over the past 50 and 60 years of actually developing space systems. So I think that model really helps balance out some of the things that you might see elsewhere.
Right. And one of the barriers that might be also authenticity in the workplace, because for a lot of us as young professionals, once we are 2-3 years in a company or an organization, we want to look at the next step for our career, want to start looking around and see what we can, go further, how we can take a step further. So a point that is very important to us is authenticity in the workplace. And as we see passion as the driving factor towards getting more accomplished during our career, I'd like to ask Bob, once recruited, how do you continue to engage with your young talent? How do you keep an authentic organizational culture and environment?
Yeah, I think I'd like to just say again, we're hiring. We're hiring a lot. So one of the things that we don't have as much is that when people need new opportunities, we have a lot. I mean, if you go through what Blue Origin's actually developing now, it's a remarkable amount of work that we have underway. And we have a New Shepard suborbital vehicle that's about to fly humans on it. We have multiple liquid rocket engines under development, a brand new heavy lift launch vehicle called New Glenn that we're building and will start flying soon, as well as we talked about earlier today, a lunar lander. We got a lot of work. So we're not having the problem of saying, is there something else that's more meaty to actually go work on? We're trying to make sure that we actually get enough people to actually do all the jobs that we actually need to get done.
Right, and General Lincoln, how is it in the military? How do you continue to engage after the recruitment to keep them involved and ensure retention?
I think we have to make them see that they have opportunities. Some people like doing one thing, and we call that the technical track, and we need people like that who just love doing that one thing. And then we need other people to branch out and get other experiences. So maybe one assignment, you are working at our Space and Missile Center in California, and then the next assignment, maybe you're coming to the National Reconnaissance Office and getting experience with the intelligence community. And then maybe you, from there, go to our Materiel Center where you're actually building something. So having people get that, it really depends on the people and listening to the people and what they want to do. And that's how we retain them. If someone is stuck and they feel like they're stuck, that's when the propensity is for them to leave the service. With our civilians, it's the same thing. Our civilians, we have to listen to them. We've just started, actually it will be starting in the fall of 2020. We're implementing a new mentor program, a senior mentor program, specifically geared towards our civilians.
Right. So one last point that I would like to approach is that once you had a successful career, one point that is very important to me as well is to give back. I think once you've had a very successful career, you want to yourself now inspire the next generation. And so a question to Juan is, the ISU has an incredible network of alumni. How do you incite your alumni to give back to the next generation of space leaders, for instance, through mentoring?
Yeah, we think giving back is important, but we prefer the term giving forward. And this allows me to make a link to what General Lincoln was saying at the beginning of our conversation, where when she acknowledged the role of her parents in her early career. You might have chosen to pay back your parents, but probably you're paying it forward to your own children or to other young people. So what we like to encourage to everyone in the community is to give forward and to pay forward so that we help the next generation. And one simple way of doing it that has given me great satisfaction is by helping newcomers feeling at home when they would join the organization where I was in. And this is probably what you see a lot in Blue Origin today. So if you are somewhere in an organization and there's a newcomer arriving, it's very easy for you to reach out and just help with small things, make that person feel at home with colleagues or with a new living environment. And my experience is that people will be thankful to you for their entire life, just for small things. So that's what we also encourage our alumni to do, our nice network of almost 5,000 ISU alumni living and working in more than 100 countries. we ask them, please pay forward in whatever way you can.
Right, and a point that you mentioned is interesting, saying that people remember good things. The industry, space industry is small, and so one of the advice to the young professionals in the room is also don't burn your bridges, like especially right now, the industry is so small. Make friends and show, everything that's positive about you, and because it will always turn to be at your advantage afterwards. And one question from the audience is, what drives you to do what you do? So this is something maybe for all the panelists to conclude our panel. What drives you to do what you do? Who would like to start? Minister Andrews?
That would be me then.
Yes.
Look, what drives me, there's multiple things. If we're talking specifically about the space sector, is that I can see such an enormous opportunity for so many people. And quite frankly, I just want to give it everything that I've got to make sure that there are opportunities, not just for our young people, but also people who are needing to transition from one industry to another. So what drives me is the prospect that there will be some people out there who will benefit greatly from the work that's being done, not just by me, but by so many people in the space sector.
Thank you. Juan?
I think what really drives us at an educational institution is just seeing the smiling faces of our graduates when they get the diploma. That's what drives us.
I have to say the same thing that inspired me coming to the military, that I was part of something bigger than myself. And I'm truly, truly committed and believe that space is for peaceful purposes. It is for exploration. It is for improving our lives here on Earth. And what drives me is making sure that that stays that way.
Thank you. Bob?
So I think one of the things that's always interesting at talking about people about Blue Origin is that it's not obvious to everyone why our company's called Blue Origin. The reason why our company's called Blue Origin is where you're sitting. It's Earth. The reason why we feel very committed to what we're doing, what drives us, is the idea that fundamentally Earth's resources are finite. It's a question of when, not if, we're going to actually run out of resources. So the question is, do we want a life of scarcity for our great-grandchildren, or do you want a life of abundance? And if you want to have that life of abundance, you have to go somewhere else for the resources. You have to actually preserve this jewel that we have that's called Earth, our Blue Origin. And so it's a very passionate, multi-generational view that we have at Blue Origin about why we need to go into space. We go to space to benefit the Earth, and it's a multi-generational view, and we want to make sure that we inspire and actually help the next generations to actually go do that.
Thank you. One last advice as potential employers to the next generation in the room on how to start their career in space. Any of you?
You should apply at blueorigin.com soon. A lot, please. Thank you.
Well, to compete with that, okay. AirForceCivilianCareer.com, USAJobs.gov, IntelligenceCareers.com. There is a wealth of opportunity working for the Department of Defense, for the United States government, as well as for the commercial and civil sector.
Thank you.
Share your experience with a friend.
Great. Mr. Andrews, any advice?
Look, it's to take every opportunity that comes your way. You don't know where it's going to lead, so be open to opportunities. You've got some great websites that have just been given to you now for specific opportunities, but take every chance that you can get.
Thank you. So we've heard from our panelists on great advice on how, as the next generation, we can make an impact in our organization, how we can, continue to be inspired and continue our career in the space sector. Also for the educators in the room, how you can better tailor your educational program to fill the gap between what the employer's expectations are and what your students will learn. So I would like to ask all of you to join me in thanking our panelists again for their participation and giving them a round of applause. Thank you very much.